Okay, so picture this. The East Antarctic ice sheet. The place is so cold that steel would just shatter.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't think anything could possibly survive out there.
Right.
But millions of years ago, this whole frozen desert was a thriving ecosystem, like teeming with dinosaurs and just lush vegetation everywhere.
Yeah, it's a pretty crazy contrast, to what we see today. But even now, like hidden beneath all those miles of ice, there's Lake Vostok.
Oh, wow.
It's this huge body of water that's been sealed off from the rest of the world for, well, potentially millions of years. And scientists, they've actually found evidence of extremophiles in it.
Extremophiles, so those are the...
They're organisms, yeah, that can survive in, well, conditions that would just kill most life forms.
Wow, that's a good one. It's like this time capsule of, like, ancient life.
Yeah.
I mean, they've found traces of bacteria and fungi, right?
Yeah.
Even some more complex organisms, all by analyzing the DNA they extracted from these ice cores.
Yeah.
It's just mind-boggling to me. Like, how has the genetic information in all these organisms been copied so accurately over all those generations? It's like the fidelity of this DNA replication across such a massive amount of time. It's just mind-blowing.
It really is. And it kind of shows just how crucial, I guess, accuracy is for life. I mean, to give you an idea of just how precise it is, imagine trying to copy, like the entire text of 1,000 books, letter by letter, with fewer than one mistake.
1,000 books.
That's the kind of accuracy we're talking about. With DNA replication, there's less than one single error per billion copies.
Wow, okay, that's a mind-boggling level of precision, that's
Yeah.
for sure. But why is it so important is because even the tiniest errors can cause problems.
Yeah, exactly. Think about, one single typo in like a really complicated instruction manual. It can make the whole thing totally useless.
Yeah.
And for DNA, these errors, what we call them mutations, they can lead to genetic diseases, even cancer.
Right, okay.
So maintaining that, like perfect fidelity, it's absolutely essential for organisms to be healthy, basically.
That makes a lot of sense. But how does DNA manage to do it? I mean, I know it's got something to do with the double helix structure, right?
You're definitely on the right track. That double helix, it's really crucial. It's kind of like, a twisted ladder.
Yeah.
The sides are made of sugar and phosphate, and the rungs are formed by these pairs of molecules that we call bases: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, A, T, G, and C.
Right.
And these bases, they always pair up in this very specific way. A always with T and G with C.
So it's like the specific pairing of these bases, those are the letters of the genetic code, right?
Exactly.
And the sequence of all these base pairs, that's what determines the instructions.
Precisely. That sequence determines everything from like your eye color to the shape of a protein. But here's where it gets really cool. The way these bases pair up, it's all dictated by hydrogen bonds, which are essentially just shared protons.
Wait, protons as in like the subatomic particles.
Yeah.
Are you telling me that the genetic code is actually controlled by quantum mechanics?
You got it. The way protons behave, that's all governed by quantum laws. And those laws are what decide how the genetic code is written and read.
That's just incredible. It's like what the physicist Erwin Schrödinger said, like decades ago.
Yeah.
He said genes were like these aperiodic crystals, and that the order is determined at the quantum level.
Schrödinger, he was way ahead of his time. Just like the shape of a crystal is decided by quantum forces, well, so is the shape and function of, well, our entire bodies. It's all thanks to this quantum nature of DNA.
It's mind-blowing. Our entire existence is like fundamentally quantum mechanical.
Yeah.
But okay, if DNA replication is so accurate, how do mutations even happen? I mean, they're super important for evolution, right?
Absolutely. Mutations, they provide all the raw material for natural selection to act on, Imagine like mixing paint versus mixing marbles. When you mix paint, all the colors blend together and you lose the original shades. But when you mix marbles, well, each one keeps its own distinct color, just like genes can be passed down, for generations without blending together. Mutations, they're like adding new, differently colored marbles to the mix. They introduce these variations that natural selection can then work on.
Okay, I see the analogy.
Yeah.
But what actually causes these mutations in the first place? If the copying process is so incredibly precise, how do these variations even pop up?
Well, there are a few different things that can cause them, like radiation, chemicals, and this really interesting process called tautomerization.
Tautomerization. I don't think I've heard of that one.
It's basically the movement of those super important protons, the ones we were talking about, within the DNA bases.
Mhm.
Sometimes these protons, they shift their position,
Okay.
and that can change how the bases pair up during replication. So basically, it introduces errors into that genetic code.
So you're saying just a tiny shift in a proton's position can actually change, like a
Yeah.
letter in the code, and then that causes a mutation.
Yeah.
But wait, wouldn't moving a proton take energy? I mean, how does that even happen inside the DNA molecule?
That's where quantum mechanics kind of comes in again. It could be
Yeah.
that the proton's moving through this process we call quantum tunneling.
Quantum tunneling. Okay, now that sounds like something straight out of like science fiction.
I know it does sound a little strange, but it's this well-established quantum phenomenon, It's kind of like, imagine you want to get over a wall, right?
Yeah,
In the normal world, you need enough energy to actually climb over it.
right.
But in the quantum world, there's this small chance that you could just tunnel straight through it, even if you don't have enough energy.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So are you saying that these protons could be tunneling to like different positions within the DNA molecule even without having the energy to do it? And that this could be causing the mutations?
Exactly. That's the hypothesis, at least. It's still an area that we're doing a lot of research on,
Right.
But there's some pretty interesting evidence that seems to back it up. Like, for example, some researchers, they're looking into whether replacing hydrogen with deuterium, that heavier isotope of hydrogen,
Yeah.
they're seeing if that affects the mutation rates.
Hold on. Why would replacing hydrogen with deuterium even matter?
Well, because deuterium is heavier, right? It's a lot less likely to actually tunnel. So if tunneling is actually happening during that tautomerization, when the protons are moving,
Right.
then, using deuterium should lead to fewer mutations.
That's pretty clever. It's like you're running the same experiment, but you're using different quantum dice and seeing if it changes the results.
Yeah, exactly.
But even if we could prove that tunneling is actually going on, I mean, how could something so tiny, like a random quantum event, even affect, like, the whole big picture of evolution?
That's a great question. Some scientists, they think that the environment could actually be playing a role in shaping these, seemingly random mutations.
Okay.
There's this thing called adaptive mutation. It's where it seems like organisms actually mutate more often when they're under stress from the environment.
Wait, so the environment could actually be influencing which mutations happen?
It's possible. Think of a bacterium that's exposed to a new antibiotic.
Right.
If it could, somehow direct mutations to the genes that are involved in antibiotic resistance,
Yeah.
well, it would have a much better chance of surviving,
Yeah.
right?
Of course.
Yeah.
That's wild. So it's not all just down to pure chance. But how could the environment even affect something as small as, like, a proton's position in a DNA molecule?
Well, one theory is that the environment might be acting like some kind of quantum measuring device,
Okay.
Remember, when we're talking about quantum mechanics, the act of actually measuring something, it can affect the system that you're measuring.
Right, right. So you're saying the environment could be, like, collapsing the quantum superposition of the proton, forcing it to, like, choose a position. And that choice, that could decide whether, like, the bacteria lives or dies.
Yeah, that's definitely a very simplified way to put it, but it kind of gets at the main idea. The environment, by putting this pressure on, this selective pressure, it could be influencing the outcome of all these quantum events.
Right.
And that would lead to a non-random distribution of mutations.
This is all mind-blowing, seriously. We've gone from, like, the depths of Lake Vostok to this tiny quantum world inside our cells. And it seems like just reading the genetic code, this basic process of life, it's actually a form of quantum measurement in itself.
It really is. Every single time that cellular machinery reads a DNA sequence, what it's doing is it's essentially measuring the position of those coding protons, And each one of those measurements, well, they could potentially cause disturbances that lead to even more mutations.
So the more a gene is read, the more likely it is to mutate. Is that what you're saying?
That's one of the hypotheses, yeah. It suggests that the act of actually reading the DNA, it's not just this passive process. It could be actively contributing to generating that genetic diversity,
This whole conversation, it's been like a real eye-opener. I never thought we'd be talking about quantum tunneling and like adaptive mutation with DNA. It's like the genetic code is this delicate balancing act between like fidelity and change.
Exactly. It's this balancing act that's been going on for, billions of years, and it's what's led to the incredible diversity of life that we see today.
It really makes you wonder what other secrets might be, like hidden inside this quantum world of DNA.
Oh, there's definitely a lot more for us to uncover. Like, researchers are starting to explore how these quantum effects might influence how proteins fold. That's crucial for how they function.
It seems like every time we take a closer look at life, we just find another layer of complexity and wonder.
Yeah.
It really makes you think, like, what do we even mean by random when we're talking about evolution? I mean, if all these quantum events can be influenced by the environment, is it really random after all?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, it's like almost philosophical, right? As much as it's scientific.
Hmm.
It really makes us rethink this whole traditional view of how evolution actually works.
Yeah.
Maybe randomness isn't even the best word for it.
Right.
It might be more accurate to say that, evolution is more like guided randoms.
Guided randomness. Huh?
Yeah, where those quantum events, they provide the like raw material and the environment kind of shapes the outcome.
I like that guided randomness. It kind of suggests this back and forth, this interplay between the quantum world and like the macroscopic world.
Yeah.
It's almost like these little tiny quantum events are constantly popping up, and then the environment's like this filter. It chooses the ones that are actually useful for survival.
Exactly. And it really highlights, just how interconnected life is, from the tiniest like subatomic particles all the way to this big web of ecosystems.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we're all part of this like crazy dance where quantum mechanics and evolution are like totally intertwined, and we're just starting to figure out how it all works.
So like, what's the big takeaway here? If we had to boil down this whole conversation about like the quantum nature of DNA into one big important idea, what would it be?
For me, it's realizing that like the blueprint of life, that code that determines who we are, it's fundamentally quantum mechanical. It's
Yeah.
not just a metaphor, it's the real deal. The exact position of those tiny little protons, those quantum particles, that's what gives meaning to life's instructions.
It's crazy to think that something so tiny can have such a massive impact on like the whole picture of life. And to think that Schrödinger, back in 1944, he actually saw this connection between quantum mechanics and how accurate DNA replication is.
I know, right?
He was seriously ahead of his time.
Schrödinger, he understood that for life to work, it had to rely on quantum mechanics to keep things, organized and stable.
Right.
And now, all these years later, we're finally starting to figure out the specifics of how it actually happens. But I think we've still got a long way to go.
It makes you wonder what other quantum secrets might be hiding inside our cells, just waiting for us to find them.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole area where quantum mechanics and biology meet, it's huge, and we've barely even scratched the surface. It's this field that's just full of potential for discovery,
Yeah.
And it could have these groundbreaking implications for like medicine, biotechnology, and even just how we understand life itself.
Well, I can definitely say that I'll never look at DNA the same way again.
Yeah.
I'll always remember that it's not just some molecule, it's a whole quantum system, It's governed by these strange and incredible laws of the subatomic world. And that's a pretty amazing thought.
I agree. It really reminds us that the universe is way more intricate and interconnected than we ever thought. And even those really familiar things about life, like heredity and evolution, they can look totally different when we think about, the strangeness of the quantum world.